All right, Chaz, let's get right to it. In the 1983 film War Games, at the height of the Cold War, you follow me?
Sure, yeah.
Of course you do. A young Matthew Broderick, Ali Sheedy, the greatness of Dabney Coleman, the perceived threat of war in that movie is rated on a DEFCON scale 1 to 5. 5 being peace and 1 being the level of imminent threat. Not in any way to compare war to the game of baseball, but I want to borrow that DEFCON scale and ask you, after back-to-back shutout losses at Great American Ballpark for the Reds level of concern with the lineup and the lack of production would fall where on that DEFCON scale?
I'm going to say 3.25. And I know that's cheating, but if the season started at 3, what we saw inched you more into the direction of saying the things we didn't think the Reds would be good at this year and the guys who didn't have good spring trainings and there wasn't a lot of momentum with heading into the season, those guys kind of backed that up with how they looked during the first week of the season.
Historical context. For the first time since 1907, the Reds were shut out 1-0 in consecutive games at home. That's just context. And we'll do movies another time because I know you're not a huge movie guy, and I know you weren't close to being alive in 1983. But I thought that was a good way to start, just to kind of gauge things for this Reds team. And with that, we say welcome in to Power Stacks with Giesenslaw and Goldsmith, episode number 3. Coming up on the show today, Chaz, Torpedo bats break the internet and show up in the Reds clubhouse. We've got that. How did Matt McLain not play a single big league game last season and still get better? We'll hit that as well. And also Terry Francona on his old school counterpart who was in town this week. And that, of course, would be future Hall of Famer Bruce Bochy. All that's on the way. But let's get in the leadoff spot and return to the Reds clubhouse on Wednesday afternoon after the second consecutive shutout. This time it was Jack Leiter and the Rangers. Even when Leiter left the game unexpectedly with a blister, the Reds at that point, I thought, okay, now you can at least get that mental break and shift. Whoever comes out of the bullpen, I don't care who it is, you get Leiter off the mound, maybe you reset, and you start to pick up some hits and score some runs. It didn't happen. When you got to the clubhouse postgame, what's that scene like and what did you hear?
It was a little antsy. Also, it was the most frustrated I've heard Jeimer Candelario in any interview I've done with him over the last 2 seasons. A sampling of what he said. He said, it's time to do our jobs. He said, it's never too early. He said, it's been crazy. We've got to figure it out. Now, Terry Francona's message post-game was, it is too early to panic, and he's not going to go make sweeping changes based off 6 games. But when you look again at kind of some concerns you had about the Reds, both individually, collective parts of the team, the outfield, the bottom half of the lineup, and then saw how it looked, it's like, yeah, everyone knows this has got to be better.
Yeah, and when you listen to Jeimer Candelario, just to hit this quickly as well, you can look at these games or these 2 series, and you can say the Reds started the season 2-4. They faced some outstanding pitching. Cy Young winners in San Francisco, certainly Nathan Eovaldi, and then Jack Leiter appears to be emerging into the category of somebody worthy of the number 2 overall pick, which he was 4 years ago. But the Reds almost matched these teams' pitching. So just specifically even speaking to the rotation, first time through the rotation plus a second start for Hunter Green, and the Reds are outstanding. That, if you want to look at 2 sides of the coin for the Reds in this series, certainly you have to win, but then you also look back and go, if you continue to get quality starts like that, and not just by definition quality starts, but at times dominant starts from guys like Green, Lodolo, Martinez, and then Carson Spires picks it up with his spot, that's a huge plus for this team.
They all look better, and it's becoming very clear what this Red season's going to try to be. It's going to be this rotation can carry this team. This isn't just a playoff caliber rotation. This is an impact playoff caliber rotation. Can the bullpen give the Reds enough quality innings on the back end? Yeah. Will the Reds, outside of Ellie De La Cruz and Matt McLain, who are fantastic, have enough around them? Can McLain and Ellie carry the offense enough for this to be a pitching and defense model team? Because we've seen great moments defensively. We've seen great moments from the rotation. I think the bullpen took a step in the right direction this week. We've seen enough to be that sort of pitching and defense model. But then, of course, they do need some help on both sides of the ball.
When you posed the question to Terry Francona postgame on Wednesday about the level of concern, I think you did it. The phrasing was, is it too early to consider mixing it up? Too early to consider lineup changes or moves? Where did that conversation go?
Yeah, Francona said probably was too early, and I went back through some data here. Of course, Francona is a completely different manager than David Bell, but when you look at the way front office conversations impact these types of things, I did think it was relevant to look at the last few seasons. In 2023, Will Benson, and he had a great year, but at the beginning he was lost, and 12 strikeouts, 20 at bats, one hit. He got 11 games before he got sent down. In 2019, the Reds offense had a historically poor start. David Bell didn't shake up the lineup for 16 games. So now again, yes, Francona will be very different. But when you look against some similar front office leadership, some overall organizational philosophy, I don't get the sense they're going to rush anything from a macro standpoint. From a micro standpoint is what I'll be following heading into Milwaukee. Does maybe Espinal get a few more at bats? Does maybe Blake Dunn get a few more at bats? Do maybe Jake Fraley or Spencer Steer or Candelario out of the lineup an extra day or two? And then is it time to already move Matt McLain up to the leadoff spot?
Yeah. And you mentioned those names. Those are the names that are available, that are options. The injuries, the injured players are still kind of floating out there on the horizon, and we don't know when that comes together or when that cavalry arrives at Great American Ballpark for this team offensively. But yeah, I think Francona's answer to you, part of it was, hey, everybody's played. Yeah, but what you're saying is more opportunities for different people than certainly some of the ones that have been given to start this season. As you look at some of the names that you mentioned, Fraley, Steer, still who knows where his shoulder is at this point. He's doing everything he can to help the team and stay on the field and play. Friedel, is there a particular player you look at that you saw some things in this series that either lead you to lean towards that, maybe shake things up a bit or give a guy a day off, or something you saw on the positive side as well?
I think it's not time to make the move on Jake Fraley yet, putting him into a bench role or something. Again, Will Benson got 11 games in 2023. I'm for not overcorrecting and micromanaging a team over the course of a season. But Jake Fraley's the guy I'm starting to get the most concerned about. Like on a scale of 1 to 5, I'd put him at a 4 or 4.5, because kind of the plan was last year he never got his feet under him. He was coming off a broken toe. He had everything going on off the field. The plan was that he'd be tapping more into his power in 2025. Well, the Reds hitting guys approached Fraley about some adjustments in spring training to help with that. And then in the middle of spring training, I talked to Jake about this on Tuesday. They quote turned the tables and then went back to what Jake was doing. And that radical of a shift with neither approach working, that's the type of stuff that gets you a little concerned and a little start to have this conversation.
All right, that's the leadoff spot. That's where we start today, and that's all fresh from the series that just ended at Great American Ballpark. As we move on to Charlie's notebook, and if you followed, you know what Charlie's notebook is. It's an actual notebook that gets filled with information, anecdotes, and all kinds of things from the clubhouse and your day at Great American Ballpark. You have inspired me, Chaz, because I, for this season, have added an actual notebook. Now, in the past, my method, and I told you before, I'm kind of a structure guy, so this might surprise you. My method in the past, everything that I wrote down during the day, whether it was clubhouse stuff or highlights for the post-game show or stuff we're talking about on the pregame show, was kind of scattered. There were random pads or pieces of paper that I jotted things down on. You inspired me so much so that I wanted to let you know that I now have a spiral notebook, not a spine like yours, a spiral notebook. It's green. As I made a note to mention it here in the show, I meant to bring it down here to actually show it to you. And of course, I left it in my backpack upstairs. But I have my notebook now too. And top line of my notebook right now is this question for you from this week. Torpedo bats, and I'll say it again, torpedo bats, passing fascination or a game changer for America's favorite pastime?
Torpedo bats, I get the sense the idea is it helps a hitter get maybe 2 or 3 extra home runs a year. And it's not going to change the game of baseball, but it does, and you can see it here on YouTube. It does hit on something just in general, concepts I'm fascinated about, which are, there are some really, really smart physicists and data analysts, and the Reds have a neuroscientist on their analytics staff, leading their analytics staff. There are a lot of smart people who are trying to find one extra win a year. And what a perfect example this bat is of a way that people weren't thinking about before, that, hey, maybe this could lead to one extra win per season.
And the beauty of it is the guy who's getting the credit right now for kind of starting this conversation or starting this revolution is a PhD in physics who worked for the Yankees, now works for the Marlins, is a former professor in physics at the University of Michigan. He's a PhD. But the concept is so simple. It took all of this time for someone to make the concept, to have the design, and now get the buy-in. That's where we are with the buy-in. So the bat you just saw belongs to Reds catcher Jose Trevino, who, of course, spent some time and was with the Yankees. So he was kind of in on the root of this. He believes that he was one of the first to actually start to swing this. He started in spring training a year ago, spring training for the Yankees, and started using it then. And so obviously when this all happened around baseball and it became the talker that it was earlier this week, we all go straight to Trevino's stall and his locker. And here's what he had to say about using and his experience with the Torpedo bats.
At first, I was like, no way. This is like, and I tried it. I liked it. I remember hitting BP with it a few times, and then I took it to a backfield game and had some success there. And then I took it to my first game in spring last year and had some success there. So I was like, you know what, this is not going to be as bad as I think. So I used it, and then I started, liking it more.
Did you think going in that you would be one of those people that said, hey, man, I've swung a bat that's similar all my life. I can't change now?
I thought I was, but I thought the same thing when they came out with the knee down stuff too. So, there's times in baseball where you need to kind of grow with the game a little bit. And I think this is one of those things. It should be.
And to me, that's one of the most fascinating things about this entire conversation is, two things. That the game of baseball, part of the beauty and part of an element that baseball takes so much pride in is that it's been this consistent game. It hasn't changed. The bases are still, well, they're not really 90 feet apart anymore. That has changed a little bit, but you get the point. Baseball has been reluctant to change in so many ways. Ball players are amongst professional athletes. They get crazy about their gear, the glove that they use, the bat that they've used always, what works and what doesn't. They don't tinker much unless they get desperate. But even when those desperate times come, you don't always get the level of experimentation that you're seeing right now with a Torpedo bat. Case in point, Ellie De La Cruz says that he picks one up for BP on a Monday afternoon when it's cold and windy in the second series of the season and decides to use it that night. That kind of immediate buy-in and experimentation is rare in baseball. So when you see what De La Cruz did, certainly the success he had that night with 2 bombs and 7 driven in, is a younger generation a little more open to change in baseball, possibly?
Quick story I'll tell about Ellie. Then on Tuesday after the night with the home runs, during batting practice, he was talking to someone and he's like, no, it's the hitter, it's not the bat. And then the person he was talking to said, but you're going to use it again tonight though, right? And Ellie goes, yeah, okay, you got me there. And things do help. Again, like this isn't going to, make Ellie hit 50 home runs in a season. I don't even think he needed any help with the home runs he hit on Monday night, but it can get you 2 or 3. And that brings me back to something Trevino said. He said he was talking about the one knee stuff, and to explain what that is, about 5 years ago, a lot of catchers started setting up on one knee instead of a traditional crouch. And what that helps you with this framing, and now it's like you move your glove up through the strike zone to create an optical illusion to maybe get 10 extra strike calls a year. And the idea and the hope is over 162, it evens out and helps skew the numbers in your favor a bit. And that was an idea that someone had that catchers were reluctant about, that they embraced, and it helped lead to winning in a small way. And now almost every catcher is doing it. So this is a fun another example of baseball going down a different trend.
We've seen some, you kind of have danced around the edges of something like this. You had the axe handle bat that was a little bit, the hockey puck, even going back to De La Cruz, whatever that was, that thing that he had on the end of his bat that was called into question, and then he hits the home run and he points.
Right. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, there are little things like that, but I think what you said, from guys talking about De La Cruz or some of the guys, this is what Terry Francona said was, hey, these are good hitters, doing these things with a bat. It's not the bat, but I think, like you said, maybe in the margins, you can help somebody whose bat speed isn't quite what it was, and maybe that lower part of the sweet spot in the bat gets through the zone a little bit better. Maybe that helps. Who knows where it goes? But right now, it's big business. All of a sudden, because of the way that it exploded with the Yankees, and now you check in with each and every other team to see who's doing it or who's interested. Apparently, the bat manufacturers are being bombarded with requests for this, but it's another thing that I don't think this drastically changes the game, but to see so many people so willing to give it a shot, that shocked me.
And I think we're getting reminded of something that we knew about Ellie, but I never really thought about, which is how important comfort is for him.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, the thing on the bottom of his bat, he just used that, in Washington in that series because it was comfortable and the swing was feeling good. I remember Ellie last year started wearing I think it was these green Mizuno gloves, these like seafoam green. I think they were gloves, and they were comfortable, and Ellie liked it, so he started doing it. And Ellie's the kind of guy who can just pick something up and it clicks and that feels good, and he's going to run with that for a little while. The bat's the latest thing. I bet he doesn't use this bat for his whole career. I bet he evolves.
Right.
And it'll be fun to see the little things that he picks up and drops, and kind of like old friends, new friends that Ellie picks up from an equipment perspective over the course of his career.
Last thing, one other funny thing that I saw, someone in Minnesota, one of the Twins players, deciding to use the Torpedo bat, said, look, guys have been going into pitching labs in the offseason the last however many years and designing new pitches and finding new ways to pitch. And the velocity and pitching has come to dominate the game. We know that baseball, fans love offense. Fans love home runs. They love seeing runs scored. And he said guys are creating new pitches all the time. And for the last 100 years, we've been swinging the same old broomsticks. And literally, the bats have changed very little over the last 100 years. There was the change in the type of wood, maple, ash, and on from that. But all of this fits within Major League Baseball's regulations. There's been no pushback so far. You wonder if people continue to experiment and tweak, if maybe they get into some gray area and it becomes a thing. But right now, managers are good. The league is good. And, we're going to continue to talk about it. But I think we both agree that it's the hitter, not so much the bat. It's not going to be a drastic change, but here we go with something new and different in baseball. Back to De La Cruz. And our topic here in the notebook is De La Cruz and Matt McLain and the impact they can have. Your good friend, my good friend, Fox 19 legend Joe Daneman, I think in passing said, can these two, can De La Cruz and McLain, be like Burrow and Chase? So borrowing from your NFL Bengals expertise as well, is that a good comp for what we could see and have started to see with McLain and De La Cruz?
The comp is, and now will Ellie and McLain be two Hall of Famers like I think Burrow and Chase are going to be? Maybe I'm not there all the way yet, but I think the most important thing to stress is that these are two star players who tangibly help each other play better in a way that shows up on the baseball field. They each collectively, there's something there, but even individually, I want to give them a lot of credit. Ellie and McLain are just better players than they've been in the past. Ellie De La Cruz, when you look at the changes that he made to his stance, Terry Francona keeps pointing out the line drive opposite field doubles that carry to the left field fence. Like, Ellie couldn't do that. Ellie looks better than he's ever been from the right side of the plate. Ellie's steals this year, go back and watch those. His jumps have been tremendous. And then McLain, even more fascinating to me. I said, Matt, you look just as good as you were in 2023, if not better. And what he said really interested me. And here we have some sound. McLain talking about how he's even better than he was the last time we saw him.
No, I feel like I'm a better player than I was in 23. Obviously, with a year off, it's tough. Missing time, missing at bats. That's a big thing. But I think mentally, I tried to work a lot on my mental game. Just ways I can get edges, taking mental at bats, going back home at night, watching other players on True Media, trying to go through at bats with them. What would I be thinking off this guy? And trying to just become a more complete player and polish off sort of the mental parts of the games. So when I come back, I could take it. And obviously, there's growing pains when you come off a year, missing a whole entire year. Fortunately, I was able to rehab in the fall league and get a good off season in. But yeah, it feels good.
Yeah, she's saying that show up.
Yeah, so yeah, there's a lot of baseball left. So continuing to grow and get better is the most important thing for me.
I mean, what a baseball rat. The first conversation I ever had with Reds, former farm director, now senior advisor, Sean Pender. And he said, he's just a baseball rat. And that's Matt McLain. Even when he's not playing, he's obsessed.
I love that. You mentioned earlier moving McLain to the leadoff spot. That's tempting to you?
It is. Now, not yet. Again, I think there's value in not being the type of team that's tinkering, that's overreacting, that really rides highs and lows and hot stretches. TJ Friedel, Francona put in the leadoff spot. He told him, I want you on base twice a day. You don't need to sell out for as much pull power this year. I believe that you're going to be able to grind your way to it. And there's value in that. Now, we've also seen, opening day, Ellie ends the game in the on-deck circle. We saw today Ellie almost didn't get the chance to hit on Wednesday in the bottom of the ninth. So there's value, I think, in having your four best hitters, your hottest hitters, and just overall guys who I think are the best hitters at the top of the lineup in McLain, Ellie, CES, and Lux. But I'm not overreacting yet in making that move. But if Terry would have started the season that way, I definitely would have, that was what my lineup projection looked like. Not that I know how to make a lineup like Terry Francona does, but I'm interested to see how much more the offense would need to be struggling before you do see a change like that.
I like that you ended that thought with, you're not Terry Francona. You know how many reasons there are that I'm not Terry Francona? There's a whole bunch. And I started thinking about this and I thought, man, you just don't see something like this very often. And I wanted to stop down and appreciate a little bit that the series we just had were the top two winningest active managers in baseball. About 4,100 wins between the two. Bochy is over 2,000. Francona's inching up towards 2,000. They've got 6 World Series titles between the two. And the last time we really saw head-to-head matchups like that, it was at least probably 12, 15 years ago. And I think, you had Joe Torre and Tony La Russa, and those guys were still running around. But I was looking at wins, and the next level of manager is not all that close. Bob Melvin has 1,600. Bud Black is over 1,000. And then you've got some of the younger guys, newer guys that are all under 1,000, under 900. A.J. Hinch, Dave Roberts, Kevin Cash, Craig Counsell. That's kind of the next list. And so it got me kind of just in this mindset of what we're seeing with those two, what they think of each other, since they've kind of been on parallel paths in the game, both as players first and then as managers. Bochy's just slightly older. But we went to Francona and asked him his thoughts on looking across the other dugout and seeing a guy like Bochy on the other side.
I think Bochy is so much of what's good in our game. And I've always felt that way, and I'm certainly not in the minority.
Doing it as long as you've done it, and the way that you've done it, and the way that you believe the game should be played, are there similarities that you see between the two?
Yeah, the way we walk. I don't ever Boch is Boch. I don't need to be comparing myself to him. He's one of a kind.
One of a kind, but they'll get to talk again in Cooperstown when they decide to hang it up. But the obvious question that came up in the most recent comparison is, of course, Bruce Bochy went to retirement, was lured back into baseball with the Rangers, and his first year back won a World Series. Francona certainly can relate to that path at the moment, and the Reds certainly hope that maybe it follows a similar track or trajectory for him coming back to the game, this time in Cincinnati. But we immediately, Chaz, say, oh man, what a couple of old school guys. We base that, on age, the fact that they've been in the game as long as they have as a player too. Is old school, new school really that simple? Is it really a thing that managers who are of a certain age or older are that different from the younger crowd that might be 15, 20 years behind them?
There are certain things that I think they stress, certain approaches that you see. Even, we're seeing the differences between David Bell and Terry Francona. Different things you prioritize, whether or not you look at games as a series of individual at bats that you want to maximize versus maybe those at bats working together and stringing together and being more situationally correspondent in a way that, or correlated in a way that Terry Francona does. What's so cool to me about Francona and Bochy, and I talked to Bochy about this in spring training, was they're really the last generation of managers that were a part of the old way, the pre-analytics movements, completely old school, that then had to embrace, all of this, all these numbers, all this stuff, or else they probably would have been phased out of the game. It probably wouldn't have worked out well for them. And I talked to, Ron Washington, Bob Melvin, Bud Black about this stuff too. And they were talking about how their willingness to adapt and evolve combined with, the old school background that they developed as they were stepping into these roles. That's really what defines this era of managers. And that's pretty cool.
It's all about balance, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense on just about any level that there are certain things that you can believe, certain ways that you can operate, but ignoring new information or new opportunities typically doesn't advance your cause no matter what you do. And so, yeah, I think most of us buy into the fact that those guys, think or speak the game even. And that's some of the other thing that you can hear is they speak or think the game a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, still trying to win baseball games. And, if it's, it's like he said today, if I thought this would equal this, then I would do it. And so I don't think those guys are in any way, kicking and screaming with some of the things they're presented with today. So
let me share a couple of things that Bochy said about this generation. He said, well, there certainly are a lot more departments that you have to talk to in the organization, but he said it hasn't changed otherwise. He said, people are the same and the job is managing people. You still want guys who are good teammates and play the game the right way. Now, you better be open-minded, Bochy said, about the process of, analytics and all of the ways the game has changed, influencing the decision-making you have. He said you better be open-minded to it. That's true if it's baseball, if it's business, because all of that information makes you better, Bochy said. But you have to filter it. You have to use it wisely. And he stressed you have to remember that these are the same types of ball players that you managed in, the 1990s.
Yeah, I think what you said there is people are people, regardless. People don't change, and you have to manage people. And those guys have seen people, all types of people for a very long time in all types of situations in the game. And there is a certain way to go about it. And certainly right now it's been, I think each of us and people watching the Reds right now are watching closely Francona just to look for some of those differences that may exist in a guy that does things differently and has done it for such a long time. Looking ahead now for the Reds, first roadie of the year. And they're going to go to Milwaukee first. And if you look at the Brewers right now, who, every year seemingly, at least, in this generation of baseball fans, Milwaukee's going to be in it. They've found a way to be the quote unquote smaller market club. They've succeeded. Haven't gotten all the way there yet, but they've had a lot of success in the division and in the National League. And they fell into the spotlight of the Torpedo bat because they opened with the Yankees, and they have some serious injuries. But over a 3-game stretch, the last 2 against the Yankees and the first game they played in their next series against Kansas City, they gave up 43 runs. 43 runs. They have since righted the ship and took the next 2 from the Royals. So they hit the Reds, having won the previous 2 games. No Willie Adames in Milwaukee right now. You've got Pat Murphy at the helm. What about that group that the Reds are going to see first on this trip?
It's a great bullpen, but the thing is the bullpen's kind of been taxed. Even these games they've had recently where they've righted the ship from a pitching perspective, with their ace, and then with Patrick, who's this out of nowhere latest seeming Brewers reclamation project, who they always seem to have pan out. Their bullpen, their high leverage guys have been taxed over the last 2 days. So carrying into a fresh series in Cincinnati or against Cincinnati, it'll be Cortez who really struggled in his debut this year. Without much help behind him, how much can the Reds put pressure on Cortez early? And then really that could give them a chance to take over the series if they really derail Milwaukee from a bullpen perspective, because then after Cortez, it's a lot of unproven and uncertainty in the rotation for the guys the Reds will face, since they won't face the Brewers top starter. So that's definitely the storyline I'll be watching.
Yeah, Freddie Peralta pitched on Wednesday against the Royals, so the Reds won't see Peralta. He was really good against Kansas City. But that will be the story, as the Reds land in Milwaukee in search of runs, because it's been, since the 6th or 7th inning of the 14-run game since they dented home plate?
I mean, bottom half of this lineup just has to hit. Sometimes, we can have a great 30-minute podcast. And sometimes it's as simple as the Reds believed in these players and what they were going to do for the team this year. And the guys they've invested in have to hit.
That is Charlie Goldsmith. I'm Brian Giesenslaw. This is Power Stacks, and we are proudly part of the Growler Podcast Network, and we hope you've enjoyed this. Please subscribe and like and share wherever you get your podcasts. Also, check us out on YouTube, but we wanted to get this out as the Reds embark on the first road trip of the season. Chaz, we'll see you at the ballpark and on our next show, which will be this weekend, right?
That's right.
All right. It's going to be fun. Thanks again. We'll talk to you next time.